day, we are celebrating the victory over fascism, over Nazism, and the victory of freedom against this terrible regime in our history. And I think it's very important that also in some parts in Europe this day will be celebrated.
Yeah, what's going? Sorry, jump in. What's going on in Europe today? In Italy as well? You know there are celebration plans, commemoration events.
Yeah, in Rome and Milan today. The Immortal Regiment will be celebrated, and also the Victory Day, also because more than 5,000 Soviet partisans participated in the liberation war in Italy during the Nazi occupation of Italy. Right. And this is a very special episode in Italian history and in the history of the Italian occupation period.
Obviously, Europe paid a very high price during the Second World War. Many of the European countries were toppled in days and weeks and just a few months. The Soviet Union, I'll get into it later, basically held out for 4 years in the face of Nazism and fascism. When you look at the state of the world today, when it comes to geopolitical events in the world today, do you think we're in a good place right now, geopolitically speaking? Because when you look back 79 years ago today, President Putin has said a number of times to his professional partners, please let us not have anyone allow for the mistakes of the past to be repeated. And yet we do find ourselves in a tenuous position today, and yet we should be able to look back 79 years ago and all be in solidarity with each other. The fact that you had the Allied forces, there was a consensus, there was a solidarity. Is that sense still around today, do you think?
Here, yes, definitely. I think we are in the right place in a geopolitical perspective, definitely, yes. And for me, it's very important that in our space, in this part of the world, the historical memory of this 7th and the Second World War, the Victory Day, still to be celebrated. Because, you know, maybe in Germany we can see the difference between West Germany and East Germany. Today, in the East Germany, in Berlin especially, the police try to ban all symbols that are connected with Russia. Wow. Like St. George ribbons, Soviet flag, Russian flag, and victory flag.
But why is that, Andrea?
I think this is a problem about historical memory, but also that I think the West wants to use politically, they want to use the history of the victory against Russia, but it's impossible. Yeah. The Soviet Union, Russia paid the victory with more than 20 million of losses. Yeah. It's impossible to forget this, but someone is trying to forget this.
Some people say that history is written by the victors. And I've been thinking about that quote, and I'm starting to disagree with it, because sometimes it seems to me that history is written by those who are in control of the media establishment, those who are in control of the publishers, for example. Because at the end of the day, the Soviet Union, the Russian Federation, as you say, well over 20 million people lost. They say it's 27, even 28 million. That's military and civilian casualties. But if you look at the United States, for example, military and civilian casualties are 420,000. The UK, the Great Britain, 450,000 casualties. France, 600,000 civilian and military casualties. And yet Russia, over 20 million. And yet when Victory Day is discussed, when the Second World War is discussed in Western countries, for some reason, when it comes to the Russian contribution, you hear crickets. Yeah. You just don't really hear anything. They just kind of brush it to the side. And when you look at these Hollywood movies about World War II, where is Russia? Where is the Soviet Union in any of these Hollywood movies?
You know, often the people forgetting that while US, UK tried to open a new front in France, from example, in 1944, the Soviet Union held his front against the big war machine in the world. In the East Front, Germany deployed more than 2.5 million soldiers. So the biggest force of the German Wehrmacht.
That's right.
Nobody of the other allies fought with us against this force.
Yeah.
So the people are forgetting that the Soviet Union resisted against this big force.
But also, Andrei, it's because you don't get this in the Hollywood movies, but it was the Soviet Union that pushed the German forces all the way back to Berlin. It was the Soviets that pushed the Germans back to Berlin. It wasn't the other Allied forces. They did come in a bit later, but it was the Soviets who were victorious in pushing the enemy back to its lair and defeating it there. Now, obviously, Andrea, today is a massively significant day, not just for Russia, but also for the former Allied forces as well, and for so many people around the world. We've seen there are commemorations being held all across Russia. You think the biggest country in the world, 11 time zones. So a lot of commemoration happening today, a lot of celebration as well, marking Victory Day 2024. Andrea Lucidi, you are a war correspondent, spending your time down in southwestern Russia, and we appreciate the hard work you're doing. We appreciate you joining us here on RT International. Stay warm, stick around, and we'll talk to you in a little while. Andrea Lucidi, thank you very much. Thank you. And we'll continue our special coverage here on RT International. It is a little bit windy right here, but we're absolutely fine. Gearing up for the parade, kicking off at 10 a.m. sharp. Hope you can stick around for our special coverage. We are live here. It's RT International on V-Day.
All right, you are looking very cool and warm down there near Red Square. That was Rory Chouchet, my colleague from our RT studio in the very center of the Russian capital. And as Rory told us, we'll be back in just about an hour as the Victory Day parade gets underway here in Moscow. Well, exactly a year before the first Victory Day, on the 9th of May 1944, Soviet troops liberated Sevastopol during the Crimean offensive. Sevastopol is the main naval base of the Black Sea Fleet, so this was one of the key military turning points in the defeat of Nazi Germany. RT correspondent Igor Zhdanov brings us more.
The city of Sevastopol was among the first to be battered by bombing campaigns after Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. Two factors made Crimea a prime target. Adolf Hitler's genocidal ambitions was one. He planned to enslave the locals and repopulate the peninsula with ethnic Germans. Another factor was purely strategic. Soviet control of Crimea jeopardized oil fields and refineries in Romania, which the Nazis were heavily dependent on. In 1941, General Manstein expected to sweep through the peninsula.
It was a week into the defense of Sevastopol, and Sevastopol fought hard, but the balance of power was not in favor of Sevastopol's residents, to say the least. Because the Black Sea Fleet was absent, the army that was to defend the city still hadn't reached it. So the people that defended Sevastopol were cadets, mechanics, and technical staff of the nearby airfield, not suited for the task. And at the main line of the breakthrough, there were only a few Marines and a political officer, 5 people altogether. At the expense of their lives, they prevented 15 tanks from breaking through.
The entire 250-day defense of Sevastopol is knitted with such acts of individual heroism. The Germans spared no resources. This is the Gustav gun, a more than 3-story high railway howitzer that made it to Crimea in 1942, specifically sent to demolish the besieged Sevastopol along with its garrison. Its shells weighed 7 tons each. In its shadow, other German artillery monstrosities like the Gamma or the Karl paled.
In general, in the Second World War, the Germans never achieved such massive use of artillery as in the siege of Sevastopol.
That might supported the onslaught of Hitler's horde that counted over 200,000 soldiers, thousands of mortars and guns, hundreds of aircraft and tanks. Meanwhile, the bleeding remains of a Soviet army pulled out of the besieged city of Odessa had to rely heavily on the help of volunteers.
The people of small, heroic Balaclava are working and fighting side by side with the Red Army on the front line. Mines and shells are exploding in the streets, but risking their lives every second, Balaclava patriots are working hard in vegetable gardens, prune vineyards, fishing, and providing first aid to the wounded.
Supplying the Sevastopol garrison was an immense challenge for the Soviet command. The city citadel was cut off from the mainland and ships were routinely sunk by Nazi bombers. So every pair of hands mattered. Those who didn't know how to fight helped dig fortifications.
It was terrible. Bombs were being dropped all around. It was scary. This was not a war, but something else, something indescribable, difficult. We were there all the time, endlessly building defensive structures. Everyone worked there from morning till evening, no days off. Iron metal sheets were spread out, and crushed stone, sand, cement was poured on them, and water was added. Concrete was made this way, and the girls would carry all this on stretchers, further and further back. It was something like a cycle.
But mounting logistical challenges and Wehrmacht's unprecedented assault eventually brought an end to the heroic 250-day defense of the Crimean city. Its last defenders had to flee on makeshift rafts with hopes the sea would be merciful. Little did they know, in 2 years' time they would once again set foot in the city they shed blood to protect.
Soviet soldiers literally had to inch forward meter by meter, moving forward. And when Sapun Mountain was already taken, but Sevastopol was not yet liberated, panic was already beginning among the German soldiers. And this panic was due to the fact that they had nowhere to run and nothing to evacuate in. It was not possible to storm Sevastopol immediately because of a very well-prepared line of defense. That's the first reason. Secondly, it's the fact that all the equipment and manpower of the German army and the Allied forces was concentrated in Sevastopol, and the surrender of Sevastopol threatened to damage the morale and the credibility of the entire German army.
It was 1941 all over again, but oh, have the tables turned. The Nazi Germany that was already evacuating was in panic. The decisive push began on May the 5th. Within 2 days, Soviet troops captured Mount Sapun, the dominating height and the gateway to Sevastopol. On day 4, all was over for the Nazis.
On the 9th of May, the resistance was already broken, because in the mind of the occupiers, military action was no longer the priority, but rather the thought of escape. And of course, at 5 o'clock in the evening, the guardsmen of the 2nd Guards Army began to force the northern bay. The resistance of the Nazis in this area was already broken. By the evening of the 9th of May, after the 3 days of decisive assaults, our troops liberated Sevastopol. At 1 o'clock in the morning on May 9th, a festive salute of 24 salvos was set off in Moscow in honor of the liberation of the city.
Something great happened yesterday in your life, and in my life, and in the lives of all our people. We returned to Sevastopol. We drove the Germans out of our Black Sea capital. We liberated the sea. We liberated your father's sacred grave.
Today, Sevastopol is back to birth at its home harbor. As 8 decades on, Russia is upholding the heirloom of that sacrifice.
Be sure to follow our special coverage of the Victory Day celebrations throughout the day. We'll be bringing you all the updates of this key day, commemorating the unwavering courage and resilience of the Soviet people in the Great Patriotic War. As the whole country celebrates the anniversary of the defeat of Nazism, Ukrainian forces have shelled the Russian city of Belgorod and its suburban areas. Shells struck residential areas of the city, setting fire to civilian vehicles and hitting residential buildings. No deaths were reported, but 8 people were wounded, including an 11-year-old girl. Medics and emergency services were sent to the scene of the attack. The U.S. has suspended a shipment of some 3,500 bombs to Israel over fears the munitions could be used against civilians in Rafah. That's been confirmed by Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin as his report to senators in Washington was interrupted by protesters. Meanwhile, in an interview to CNN, President Joe Biden stressed that if the IDF goes into Rafah, he would hold some shipments of American weapons to Israel as they are killing civilians in Gaza. Meanwhile, deadly strikes continue to hit Gaza. Almost 35,000 Palestinians have been killed during the ongoing war since October 7th. That's according to the Health Ministry of Gaza. 1.5 million people are displaced, with most buildings reduced to rubble. However, earlier, IDF strikes were described by U.S. officials as self-defense. We heard from Steve Gill, radio host and political commentator. He says Biden's statement is only intended to calm pro-Palestinian protests across the U.S.
I think the main thing that Joe Biden is trying to accomplish now is to quiet the protest on American campuses where they're, screaming their anti-Semitic, anti-Israel phrases. He's wanting to try and divorce himself from Israel to try and placate them. And then the same thing's true in key battleground states where his reelection is wavering in places like Minnesota and Michigan that he has to carry. And the Arab vote, the Muslim vote in those states are critical to his base. He's trying to placate them by sacrificing Israel. And I don't think he's going to win votes among the American population by sacrificing Israel for his campaign.
Well, do stay with RT International. We'll have full coverage of the Victory Day parade in Moscow beginning in about half an hour. Bye-bye.
Это впервые в истории мы видим блокаду такого огромного города, который не сдался, выдержал ее, несмотря на потерю более 1 миллиона человек. Прецедентов в истории, в принципе, нет.
5 нечеловеческих форм страданий пережили жители блокадного Ленинграда. Это артобстрелы, бомбежки, это холод, это темнота, это голод и смерть.
Блокада Ленинграда заставила и международные организации, и советское правительство формулировать принципы того построения мира, чтобы такое больше никогда не повторилось.
Память об этих событиях передается из поколения в поколение, наверное, практически в каждой семье.
Germany's Operation Barbarossa against the USSR should have lasted 6 weeks. Nazi troops were split into 3 army groups, North, South and Center. Group North's task was to capture Leningrad. In summer 1941, German propaganda boasted that the cradle of Bolshevism's days were numbered.
In 3 to 4 weeks, we'll be in Leningrad. The war's as good as won. Adolf Hitler, July the 2nd, 1941.
Война на Востоке для Гитлера была войной на уничтожение, а Ленинград – символом коммунистической революции. Город на Неве, который фюрер считал необходимым уничтожить, сравнять его с землей.
Ну, это бывшая столица империи. На нем замыкались просто многие интеллектуальные и экономические связи. Это город с колоссальной промышленностью, более 300 крупных предприятий, 60 высших учебных заведений, население более 3,5 миллионов человек.
At first, the enemy advanced at about 25 to 30 kilometers a day. By September, German forces were barely moving a kilometer in a day.
Во-первых, блокировала весь северо-запад Советского Союза, нарушала все коммуникации и открывала дорогу на Москву с севера. Это было бы катастрофой.
In the shortest possible time, 3 lines of defense were built around Leningrad. The first, 120 kilometers from the city. The second was 30 kilometers away, while the third literally hugged the city limits.
Это Лужский оборонительный рубеж. Его строило несколько сотен тысяч человек. И в основном женщины, подростки и пожилые мужчины, которых не призывали в армию. Это, конечно, героический был труд, потому что соорудить такие окопы за столь короткий срок было очень сложно. И это, кстати, удивило немцев. Они-то думали, что они сходу прорвутся.
The Luga defense line is where Leningrad residents engaged the enemy for the first time. Unyielding resistance by the Red Army, the militia and ordinary citizens successfully halted the German advance, albeit briefly. Meanwhile, the city was actively gearing up for defense as preparations were made for people and factories to be evacuated.
Уже кольцо блокады уже подходило к нам сюда, уже в сентябре было понятно, что немцы окружат наш город, но все равно завод работал и над вопросом поставки танков для Ленинградского фронта.
It was first decided to evacuate the Kirov plant in August 1941, but that plan was postponed because the things it made were so unique, the risk was justified.
Завод обладал запасами материалов, да, и уже навыками по выпуску танка КВ. И мы хотели как можно больше сделать танков для защиты нашего города и нашей страны.
The KV-1 tank earned its combat stripes when first tested in battle. The Wehrmacht had yet to develop any tank to match it. The heavy Soviet tank could only be stopped if hit at close range. The Kirov plant didn't stop working even for a minute. Workers spent days and sometimes weeks at their machines. Determined to exceed production tasks, they were forced to leave their children at home alone.
Родилась в Ленинграде в 1938 году, в октябре. Когда война началась, было 2 года 10 месяцев. Мама работала на Кировском заводе, а я была с няней. Девочка 16 лет из-под Луги была у меня няней. Но когда она узнала, что немцы подходят близко к Луге, она оставила меня одну и ушла сама в свою деревню. И когда мама пришла домой, а их забирали сразу на неделю, и сколько дней я, день, 2, 3, я не знаю, сколько я пробыла одна, но она, обнаружив меня одну, голодную, зареванную, можно представить, ребенок, которому нет 3 лет, в каком состоянии, один. Ну и она тогда решила отправить меня в эвакуацию.
Children were mainly evacuated in organized groups from schools and daycare centers. Their teachers and carers went with them.
И так вот я поехала. Сколько нас было сразу детей, я не знаю, но знаю, что детей подсаживали на разных станциях. В вагоне, в котором мы ехали, это теплушка, просто лежали нары настеленные в 3 ряда, и в повалку лежали маленькие дети.
When the war broke out, more than 850,000 children under 16 lived in Leningrad. More than half were preschool age.
Старшие дети, когда родители их отправляли, явно давали какой-то рюкзачок, в который пихали и еду, и теплую одежду. А что можно дать ребенку годовалому, 2-летнему, 3-летнему? Ничего. Он с собой ничего не возьмет. Мне мама дала куклу и говорит, береги ее и никому не давай. Я понимаю, что это не от жадности. Я понимаю, что это была единственная связь у меня с домом. И вот когда нас везли, и на 8-й день привезли на станцию Лычково. Это была первая станция, где детей высадили и нормально покормили, и приняли целую кучу детей из других районов. Подъехали дети на подводах, на машинах, кто-то пешком пришел. Когда нас уже накормили и объявили посадку. И вот я уже была в первом вагоне, и, по-моему, весь первый вагон уже был полный. В этот момент, как раз, когда объявили посадку, налетели самолеты. Первый вагон, в котором я была, от него ничего не осталось. Второй вагон тоже был весь разбитый. А какие-то задние вагоны остались практически целыми. И тех, кто выжили, их собрали в первый же день и увезли. Те дети, которые были ранены, их повезли обратно в Ленинград. А на 2-й день стали разбирать трупы. И там под трупами лежала я невредимая. А может, вредимая, потому что если я сутки пролежала и молчала, может, у меня контузия была, я не знаю. Через сутки мальчик местный доски убирал. То, что оставалось после разбитого эшелона, вот ему нужно было это увозить. И он увидел под трупами детская рука, которая держит красивую куклу. И он решил, что ребенок мертвый, куклу он возьмет с сестренки. А оказалось, что кукла зажата была у меня в руке плотная. И вот он вытащил меня из-под трупов целую. Но ранений никаких внешних не было. Как сообщили маме, я не знаю, но как-то связались, что вот ребенок находится у нас. Как раз началась блокада. Первые дни блокады были. Но мама сказала, больше она меня никуда не отдаст. Говорит, будем умирать так вместе. Выживем тоже вместе.
С 4 сентября 1941 года были отмечены первые артобстрелы Ленинграда. Дальность стрельбы доходила до 30 и более километров.
Leningrad liegt im konzentrischen Feuer der deutschen Batterien aller Kaliber.
July 1941 saw the first air raids on the city. In just 2 months, the Luftwaffe bombed Leningrad 17 times.
Говорит штаб местной противовоздушной обороны. Воздушная тревога! Воздушная
Когда началась война, мне было 14 лет. И у папы, и у мамы, и у меня знак за оборону Ленинграда.
Anatoly and his parents survived the siege of Leningrad. As a teenager, he kept a journal on almost each one of the 872 days in which he recorded life in the city.
September the 8th, massive air attack on Leningrad at 6:55 p.m. The planes dropped 6,327 incendiary bombs on the Moskovsky, Krasnogvardeyski and Smolninsky districts, 183 fires across the city.
И 8 сентября началась блокада Ленинграда, которая продлилась 872 дня.
Из нас, старшеклассников, создали бригады по защите школы от зажигательных бомб.
С самолетов их сбрасывали, как правило, кассетами, большими партиями. Они разлетались, пробивали легко крышу, падали на чердак и начинали интенсивно гореть. Температура накала где-то до 2500 градусов. Не так просто подойти к бомбе, которая извергает пламя, но вот как бенгальский огонь, только гораздо мощнее она разбрасывает. Еще и вращается вокруг оси, схватить ее не так просто.
Мы дежурили на чердаке, смотрели, чтобы зажигательные бомбы не попали в чердак. И вот вдруг услышали налет бомбардировщиков немецких на нашу школу. Гул такой. Услышали сотрясение такой земли, и после этого увидели в 750 метров от нас горел эвако-госпиталь. Там погибло более 1000 человек, и раненых, и врачей.
Много очень исторических зданий было повреждено и снарядами, и бомбами. Около трети, например, жилого фонда подверглась разрушениям. Следы вот эти до сих пор остались на многих местах от осколков. На Исаакиевском соборе следы на колоннаде от осколков снарядов, и вот на Аничковом мосту.
В самом начале войны наша разведка получила фотопанорамы немецкие города, где были обозначены все доминанты. И вот эти доминанты, трубы, краны на верфях, золоченые купола, они служили реперами, от которых шел отсчет обстрелов стратегических объектов. Была поставлена задача скрыть эти купола. Вот этот важный ориентир.
Some buildings were camouflaged even before the siege began. St. Isaac's Cathedral was one, and it became a sort of testing ground for Leningrad's architects.
Его купол был закрашен. Проверялись краски, цвет, устойчивость. И, по сути, потом уже можно было как-то корректировать принятую рецептуру при маскировке других объектов. Когда маскировали Михайловский замок, Крестовоздвиженскую церковь, Адмиралтейство, Петропавловский собор, это уже были обстрелы. И, конечно, отсутствие уже любых ресурсов, и это значительно усложнило работу.
И некоторые памятники зарывали в землю. Например, вот около Михайловского замка, памятник Петра I, его сняли с постамента и закопали в землю, точно так же, как и знаменитую конную плотовскую группу на Аничковом мосту. Их закопали во дворе Дворца пионеров. Маскировали с помощью сетей, укрывали памятники мешками с песком, деревянными щитами оббивали. Так большинство памятников было закрыто.
Вокруг памятника Николаю I были такие деревянные стаканы, опалубки. Ну, собственно, от прямого попадания ничего бы, конечно, и не спасло. При этом такая возможность тоже учитывалась, поэтому перед тем, как памятники укрывать, их фотографировали и обмеряли, зарисовывали. И не только зарисовывали сам памятник, но и отмечали на планах его такую географическую привязку к соседним зданиям, чтобы можно было его восстановить и установить на прежнем месте.
World's largest democracy votes, the rest of the planet watches. In an emerging multipolar world, India's voice matters. But who will be the power behind it? Watch as almost 1 billion people decide, and billions more react.
On the very first day of the siege, the food warehouses burned down after German planes dropped 280 incendiary bombs on them.
Ситуация с продуктами начала значительно усложняться, начиная с сентября 1941 года. Даже вышло специальное постановление, в общем-то, правительства Ленинграда о запрете отпускания продуктов без продуктовых карточек.
In September, Leningrad's authorities took stock of remaining food supplies. Based on normal consumption rates, they estimated it would last no more than 3 months. As well as constant shelling and looming famine, the city faced an abnormal cold snap. In 1941, winter came very early to Leningrad. The average temperature in October never went above 1 degree Celsius, and in November, it turned to freezing. The decision was finally made to evacuate the Kirov plant. Bombing raids made sure it was no longer possible to work at full force. The machinery was packed urgently, and the last groups left the city in autumn under heavy shelling.
Вы представляете, что это такое? Это температура уже была где-то, ноябрьская температура, она была уже минусовая. Люди просто в телогрейках, в фуфайках, они работали с холодным металлом. Этот металл надо было по гаечкам разобрать, чтобы потом на месте именно собрать так, как это должно быть.
After its move to Chelyabinsk, the plant didn't close and kept working until the war ended.
Необходимо было находить ту продукцию для выживания. Да, мы выпускали и буржуйки на первых порах, и всевозможные приспособления для защиты снайперов были такие, изготавливались щиты, штык-ножи, заготовки для снарядов. Но основное направление это было ремонт той техники, которая приходила с передовой с линии фронта.
The workers' children who stayed in the city went to 24-hour kindergartens and boarding schools.
Меня отдали в круглосуточный ясли-сад, назывался «Очаг». Мама работала сутками на заводе, их не отпускали. Отпускают на 1 день помыться, привести себя в порядок и снова на работу. На эти дни она только меня и забирала к себе.
Teenagers played an active part in the city's defense. With adults, they built fortifications, cleared rubble from shelled sites, and often manned factory machines.
Порядка 10 тысяч человек у нас ушло в Кировскую дивизию народного ополчения, которая защищала Лужский рубеж. Порядка 15 тысяч наших кировцев вместе с членами семей были эвакуированы в Челябинск. Естественно, те рабочие места, которые освободились, заполнялись женщинами, детьми. Тут уже от возраста не зависит. Смог работать, значит, сможешь, выполняешь эту работу. Никто в паспорт не смотрел.
Когда началась Великая Отечественная война, в сентябре город оказался в блокаде. Отцу было 15 лет, его младшей сестре 12. И они с родителями остались в блокадном городе. Дед работал на одном из оборонных предприятий Ленинграда, и в ту самую страшную зиму 1941-1942 года он умер от голода, причем умер прямо у рабочего станка. Отец был на грани истощения, как рассказывала бабушка. Можно сказать, что чудо его вернуло к жизни. Лет 10-15 назад на Пискаревском кладбище была создана информационная система. Стало понятно, чьи останки находятся в братских могилах. В одной из них и лежат останки его деда Михаила Ивановича Арышкина. Так что блокада – это часть истории моей семьи, и память о блокаде передается из поколения в поколение.
The 872-day siege changed Leningrad beyond recognition. The facades of imperial buildings and ancient cathedrals had to be camouflaged to save them for future generations.
Адмиралтейство доставило массу хлопот руководству города и руководству Ленинградского фронта, поскольку узнаваемый и план, протяженное здание, очень читаемое с воздуха, шпиль покрыт сусальным золотом, поэтому его нельзя красить, необходимо закрыть специальным чехлом. Этот чехол надо как-то поднять наверх. Но промышленных альпинистов в городе или осталось очень мало, и кроме того, они заняты на других оборонных объектах. И тогда отдел охраны памятников привлекает альпинистов-любителей. В первой бригаде было 4 человека. Ольга Афанасьевна Фирсова, пианистка, Александра Ивановна Пригожева, она была секретарем этого общества. Сотрудник студии «Ленфильм» Алаис Августович Земба. И совсем еще молоденький, 18-летний младший лейтенант Михаил Михайлович Бобров, который попал в эту группу потому, что учился в школе, над которой шествовал Ленфильм.
A cold autumn, high winds and constant shelling. The climber's task was barely realistic. Help came from the air as pilots dropped the rigging onto the spire.
При помощи специальных лебедок подняли вот этот полутонну весивший чехол и постепенно разрезали веревки и как штору маркизу опускали все ниже и ниже. И потом поднимались вот девушки Пригожева и Фирсова. И их задача была в том, чтобы специальной такой цыганской, так называемой иглой, стягивать этот халат, этой иглой его сшивать, а потом еще специальными шнурами обматывать.
Throughout the siege of Leningrad, climbers covered spires and domes and repaired the wrapping. In November, power from outside the city came to a halt. Power plants that produced 70% of the city's electricity ended up outside the encirclement. Most of the power was used by factories, but there wasn't even enough for them.
Известно, что вот в 1941 году мы сами вот на печках, на буржуйках сушили двигатели. Обмотка двигателей, которая приходила в негодность, ее перематывали, и вот необходимо было подсушивать, да, вот не то, что вот как бы принято по технологическому процессу это делать в сушильных камерах, просто обходились тем, что вот разжигали буржуйку.
Hi everybody. Just some reason it just
До сих пор. Вот у меня нету чувства «я хочу есть». Потому что они атрофировались, видимо, тогда еще.
The rationed bread available to the people of besieged Leningrad could barely be called food. It contained all kinds of additives.
ГОСТ по влажности был отменен. И воды иной раз и в 2 раза больше, чем полагается по норме. Полагалось по довоенной норме, добавляли туда, чтобы технически увеличить массу хлеба. Его называют и сравнивают с записью в дневниках с куском глины, с пластилином. Есть такая фраза, к примеру, в дневнике: «Мы ели хлеб тяжелый, как булыжник». Поскольку муки не хватало, катастрофически были подсчитаны запасы муки, на сколько дней их хватит, и посчитали, что если туда добавлять ту же обойную пыль, к примеру, соевую муку, жмых добавляли, пищевую целлюлозу специально для этого разработали, то, конечно, удастся растянуть запасы муки и тем самым дожить до более благоприятного времени.
Cameramen captured famous footage of the tragedy and horror that the city suffered. It conveys the sheer awful nature of what was happening in the Leningrad siege. It's terrifying to imagine what it was that those people suffered through all of those days.
Дети, можно сказать, самая пострадавшая категория населения. Я читал записи, к примеру, одной из учительниц, которая провела самую тяжелую блокадную зиму здесь, в Ленинграде, с 4-летним мальчиком своим. Вот она пишет, что когда ребенок уже в 4 года понимает, что жизнь конечна, он осознает это. Не каждый ребенок с 4 года вообще может воспринять себе такое. Когда на глазах у него умирают самые близкие люди, конечно, это не проходит бесследно для детской психики. Учителя и воспитатели детских садов нередко пишут, что они не были похожи на детей. Единственное, на что они реагировали, это когда речь шла о еде. И все разговоры у них были только о еде. Они вспоминали, как они ели до войны, мечтали о том, что они сейчас съедят, если им что-то дадут.
Когда я была дома, мама варила столярный клей. Столярный клей делался из костей, и его потому употребляли в пищу как еду, как бульон делали.
От некоторых блокадников он получил прозвище блокадного шоколада из-за схожести. Но это исключительно внешняя схожесть. Его сначала размачивали, потом долго варили. Получалось желе, Оно было неприятно на запах и на вкус, с чем пытались бороться с помощью специй и приправ. Ну и таким вот образом столярный клей и ели. Типичная дистрофия, которую мы все с вами представляем, начинает появляться уже к концу ноября, начале декабря 1941 года, когда смертность от дистрофии составляла порядка 50 тысяч человек за месяц. Причем характер смерти у них был очень нетипичный, опять же, поскольку смерть наступала буквально моментально. То есть работник завода возвращался после своей смены завода домой, и просто по пути до дома в один определенный промежуток времени у него останавливалось сердце, и он падал замертво просто на дороге. Смерть наступала мгновенно. В первое время медики даже не знали, что указывать в качестве причины смерти вот подобных эпизодов, поэтому они либо ничего не ставили в качестве причины смерти, либо ставили прочерк, поскольку лечить нужно было не только дистрофию, но и сопутствующие, опять же, заболевания. Частично объясняет такую высокую смертность в блокадном Ленинграде. Например, цинги, различные плевриты. Чем вызвана вообще цинга? Это недостатком витамина С в организме человека.
Выпадение зубов, нарушение целостности сосудов, всевозможные кровоподтеки и прочее. Но было принято решение бороться с этим путем приготовления хвойных настоев. Здесь в этой инструкции описывается, в какой посуде можно, в какой нельзя. И принимался по 2 столовых ложки в день. Вот такая была суточная доза.
Everyone was treated that way, both adults and children. Doctors were often as exhausted as their patients. People fought for survival, making things from almost nothing just to make life a little easier. As well as electricity, water also disappeared from homes. Water and drain pipes froze, and they had nothing to warm them up. People melted snow and brought water home from the Neva in buckets and canisters. They didn't fetch much because they were almost completely exhausted.
Я ходил с ведрами, там у нас есть пожарная часть, вот мы туда ходили и брали воду, и поднимал я эти воду на 5-й этаж. Вот это я четко, хорошо помню.
Они все были закутанные, потому что мерзли. В квартирах было не больше 0 градусов. Невозможно было отапливаться. Не было ни электричества. Они жили в темноте. Вспоминая это все с трудом, можно представить себе тот человеческий дух, наверное, который требовался для того, чтобы прожить в тот момент в тех условиях.
Очень переживаю за военных, которые погибают, но они достойны защищать нашу родину. По нам начали стрелять украинские. Мне ногу ранили. Вот так вот аж. Да, чуть-чуть остался шрам. Фашисты первые наступали на нашу землю, а мы защищали ее, терпели, погибали. Но они все равно идут прям до победы.
I'm Rachel Rubel, live in Moscow. It is a special day for Russia and the world, marking the 79th anniversary of the Red Army's defeat of Nazism in the Great Patriotic War. Today, we commemorate the unwavering courage and resilience of the Soviet people, whose triumph over fascism came at the cost of colossal sacrifice and loss. We are bringing you our special coverage from the victory parade in the very heart of Moscow, Red Square, which is set to kick off in just a few minutes. Let's cross live to my colleague Rory Shushay and his special coverage from our studio near Red Square. Rory.
Thanks, Rachel. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much. Yeah, we're all ready to go here and awaiting down now, just counting down the final minutes before the official Victory Day parade kicks off across the iconic cobblestones of Red Square. In fact, let's cross down there right now. Let's cross live to RT's Don Corder, who's standing by near the tribune down on Red Square, not far away from where the Russian president will be sitting. Don, I know you're gearing up, you're getting ready. What are your expectations?
That's right, Rory. We're here on Red Square right now. The legendary May 9th military parade on Red Square is just about to begin. You can hear behind me the military is already getting ready and set up for marching on Red Square. This is actually the coldest Victory Day parade in Moscow since the last 25 years, actually. It's around 0 degrees Celsius right now. Earlier it was snowing, -2, but that hasn't stopped people from coming out onto the streets, joining into the balconies here, the bleachers rather, sorry, to watch this legendary parade take place. There's guests from all over the world here, specifically mostly from presidents of countries like Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Belarus, and even presidents from countries outside of Eurasia as well. We're talking about countries like Laos and Cuba as well. There's a Cuban delegation. The president of Cuba is here to watch this amazing ceremony as well. And, of course, because this is just such an important holiday for the Russian people, not only the Russian people, but for people all across the former Soviet sphere, because of course we can't forget that in the Great Patriotic War in World War II, over 27 million people died to fight and conquer and be victorious over fascism. 79 years of victory over fascism, and 27 million Soviet people died for that, to save the world from that horrible ideology. That's civilians, soldiers, every family in Russia has been affected or has a family member that was affected somehow by this war. So now, actually, we're hearing that Vladimir Putin is going to be coming out very soon to give his speech at the beginning of this parade, which happens every year. So let's actually cross to him right now. It looks like he's right now actually meeting with the people in the bleachers, the important guests from all over the world, veterans as well. It's important to also understand that from Moscow and the Moscow region alone, there's 150 veterans of the Great Patriotic War in attendance here. These bleachers that are right in front of Red Square, which gave basically the best vantage point for people watching the military parade. These every year are usually reserved for veterans of the Great Patriotic War, their family members, as well as international guests, like I mentioned before, this year being from the Cuban delegation, the delegation from Laos, because the presidents of both these countries and other countries have actually been here on several day-long working visits. They came either yesterday or 2 days ago, because it coincides with another important meeting that happened yesterday of the Supreme Council of the Eurasian Economic Union, which was kind of, also another important meeting that coincided with May 9th. But now it looks like we're going to get to the President of the Russian Federation is going to soon give his speech, Vladimir Putin. So let's cross over to that and see what's going to happen.
Bearers of the national flag and the victory banner. Attention.
Военнослужащие почетного караула вносят...
Entering Red Square are the servicemen of the Kremlin Regiment, bearing the national flag of the Russian Federation and the symbol of victory in the Great Patriotic War, the victory banner. 79 years ago, in the spring of 1945, Mikhail Yegorov and Meliton Kantaria of the 150th Idritsa Motor Rifle Division raised the Soviet flag over the Reichstag building in Berlin. This banner became a symbol of the great victory over Nazism. For every Russian, this flag is sacred. It is a relic handed down to us by our grandfathers and great-grandfathers who gave their lives to protect peace and safeguard our future.
In other words, it's snow mixed with rain.
The Russian national flag and the victory banner are carried by the most distinguished servicemen of the 154th Preobrazhensky Independent Commandant's Regiment, Sergeant Anton Mikhailov and Sergeant Dmitry Monastyryov.
The American military where as a soldier you're not allowed to hold an umbrella.
The banner guards are led by Senior Lieutenant Gennady Zvonkov and Senior Lieutenant Alexei Paskany.
Tell me when to speak. The Russian Defense Minister and hero of the Russian Federation, Army General Sergei Shoigu, is heading towards the center of Red Square to receive a report from the Moscow garrison. Now, greeting Minister Shoigu will be the Commander-in-Chief of the ground forces of the Russian Federation, Army General Oleg Salyukov. The Defense Minister and the Commander-in-Chief of the ground forces beginning the review of the parade formations of the Moscow garrison troops. Now, today's parade will see over 9,000 soldiers and officers, among them, as we understand, over 1,000 veterans of the special military operation. And Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Parade Commander Oleg Salyukov will now inspect and wish Happy Victory Day to the regiment of the Combined Arms Academy of the Armed Forces, the cadets of the Military University and the Military Logistics Academy.
I'm here. There he is. Is it snow or rain? That is mixed. You know, you see it's not sticking, so it's sticking on those statues. Probably because the metal is really cold. Can you imagine how miserable that is? Really cold rain mixed with snow?
Attention. Present arms. To the sound of the march, Russian Defense Minister and the hero of the Russian Federation, Army General Sergei Shoigu, is heading toward the center of Red Square to receive a report from the Moscow garrison. Greeting Minister Shoigu is the Commander-in-Chief of the Ground Forces of the Russian Federation, Army General Oleg Salyukov.
Convertible Auris, that's right.
Comrade Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, the troops of the Moscow garrison are ready for the parade marking the 79th anniversary of victory in the Great Patriotic War. Commanding the parade is General of the Army Salyukov. Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Parade Commander Oleg Salyukov will now inspect and wish Happy Victory Day to the regiment. And this parade will see over 9,000 soldiers and officers, among them over 1,000 veterans of the Special Military Operation. Now the Defense Minister and the Commander-in-Chief of the Ground Forces will wish Happy Victory Day to the regiment of the Combined Arms Academy of the Armed Forces, the cadets of the Military University and the Military Logistics Academy. Greetings, comrades. Greetings, comrade. Happy anniversary of the great victory. The ground forces are the backbone of the Russian army. Throughout Russia's long history, they have stood firmly in defense of the fatherland. Just like in the brutal years of the Great Patriotic War, Russian ground troops are now liberating the world step by step from the scourge of neo-Nazism and international terrorism. They display courage, bravery, and an unbreakable will to victory, acting with integrity and determination in the most demanding environments. Greetings, comrades. Greetings, Comrade Minister of Defense. Happy anniversary of the great victory.
God, it's just
the Defense Minister.
It's amazing to hear the hoorahs. I mean, I am above Red Square, but these hoorahs are echoing all over the heart of Moscow. As we see the Defense Minister inspecting all the different regiments across Red Square. V-Day 2024.
Sounded so good
and
by
an
the Russians
awful
doing
lot
it,
of
so the
people
Marines
in
do it.
attendance. It's such an important day for Russia. So important for all the people of the Russian Federation, with so many lost in the Second World War, the Great Patriotic War, 28 million. That includes civilian and military deaths as well. Not a single family unaffected by the Great Patriotic War from, 79 years ago today. And you see the people in attendance now, because the memories are still fresh. 79 years ago was not that long ago. Let's listen in and watch a little bit more for now.
National Guard, Federal Security Service, the Russian Minister of Emergency Situations, and the Kremlin cadets.
Yeah, the problem is more and more people believe that.
What America wanted and all that. Yeah, that's what the whole idea is. It's changing history.
Greetings, comrades.
It's like book burning.
Greetings, Comrade Minister of Defense.
And there are no Nazis.
Happy anniversary
Nazis are good. Or
of the great victory.
Trying to do now.
Next, the Defense Minister inspects the parade formations of the soldiers fighting in the special military operation.
You know, it seems to me like I was taught that in World War II, it was the whole world.
All right, let's get down now to the iconic cobblestones of Red Square. Artist Don Corter now standing by for us here. You've got such a good position, Don. You're right in the thick of it. Tell me how you're getting along.
They switched over.
Yeah, well, this is the first time. I mean, I've covered the Victory Day Parade for already 4 years in a row here, but this is the first time I'm this close to what's going on here, and I have to say it's absolutely breathtaking. Seeing so close, up and personal, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation giving his congratulations to all these troops, all the hurrahs. You can hear it right now, but being here, of course, is a different thing. You can hear echoes throughout Red Square of the soldiers' hurrahs, and it just kind of foreshadows just how great and loud the actual parade itself is going to be, especially when the armored columns come through. We're expecting around 75 armored vehicles, and including tanks and everything like that, to come through Red Square today. And it's going to be led, as is every year, led by a tank that's from the Great Patriotic War itself, bringing the flag of victory on board. So, and now we can see, it looks like the parade is about to begin. It's, or rather, no, we're about to hear from Vladimir Putin, actually. After this part of the ceremony kicks off, he's going to give his speech. And then we're going to see the musical ensemble that leads the on-foot part of the parade go through Red Square and start that off. So really an incredible thing to watch, especially the music up live military music here on Red Square. So let's take a listen now to what Vladimir Putin is going to say.
Day parade. Army General Shoigu reporting.
Уважаемые граждане России,
Citizens of Russia,
дорогие ветераны,
dear veterans,
товарищи солдаты и
comrade
матросы,
soldiers and sailors,
сержанты и старшины,
sergeants and warrant officers,
мичманы и прапорщики,
midshipmen and sergeant majors,
офицеры,
comrade officers,
генералы и адмиралы,
generals and admirals,
бойцы, командиры,
soldiers and commanders
специальной
participating in the special military operation.
Поздравляю вас
Happy
Днем
Victory Day.
Победы с нашим самым главным.
This is the most important, truly popular and sacred day when we honor our fathers and grandfathers who fought to protect our land and to crush the scourge of Nazism and liberated the peoples of Europe and achieved the peak of military and labor glory. We see attempts to distort the truth. It is inconvenient to those who have grown used to building new colonial policies. They honor those who fought alongside Nazism. They erect monuments to those complicit with Hitler. And they want to raise the memory of the great feats of our forefathers. This revanchism and this attempt to whitewash the crimes of Nazism is just part of the Western policy aimed to ignite new regional conflicts, to stoke religious and ethnic hatred, to stifle independent centers of global development. We reject the claims of any state or alliance to exclusivity. We know the consequences of such limitless ambition. Russia will do everything in its power to prevent this, but we will never allow anyone to threaten us. Our strategic forces are always ready. The West wants to forget the lessons of the Second World War, but we remember how the fate of humankind was decided in the battles of Moscow, Leningrad, Rzhev, Stalingrad, Kursk and Kharkov, Minsk, Smolensk and Kiev. In dire battles from Murmansk and the Caucasus to Crimea. The hardest, longest years of the Great Patriotic War. The fighters of the Soviet Union fought against Nazism almost alone, while the Wehrmacht was supported by all of Europe. Russia and never tried to diminish the role of the Allies and the Second Front. We honor all of those who fell while fighting Hitler, those who were part of the resistance, the courage of the people of China who fought against the militarist aggression of Japan. And we will always remember and we'll never forget our common struggle and the inspiring traditions that we had together. Comrades, Russia is now going through a historic point. Its fate, its future depends on every single one of us. And today, on this Victory Day, we recognize this especially clearly. And we honor the generation of heroes, and we accept their tradition of friendship and fortitude, of being confident in yourself and in your country, and love your motherland sincerely. We honor the veterans of the special military operation. All of those who are fighting along the contact line are our heroes. We bow down to their courage and self-sacrifice. Russia is united to support you. Our veterans believe in you. They feel part of your fate. We are one people, and this is a generation of heroes. We bow down before all of those who sacrificed their lives for the victory in the Great Patriotic War, and we honor their memory, their sons, their wives, their brothers and sisters, all their families and friends. We bow down to the veterans of the Great Patriotic War who have left this world, as well as the civilians who suffered and died as a result of the atrocious crimes of the Nazis, and those who have died fighting for our country. A minute of silence.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
Дорогие наши ветераны,
Dear veterans,
товарищи,
comrades,
друзья,
friends,
9 мая – это всегда очень
May the 9th
эмоциональный,
is always a
пронзительный
deeply
день.
emotional and poignant day. Every family has its own heroes to celebrate.
Фотографии в дорогие любимые
To look at the photographs,
вспоминают родных,
to the faces they hold dear,
как они воевали,
and they remember their stories about how they fought and how they worked.
объединяет
The
все
Victory
поколения.
Day unites
Мы идем
all the
вперед,
generations,
опираясь на наши
and we
вековые
march
традиции.
forward,
What he said at the beginning,
уверен,
whitewashing
relying on our
and all that, and then they're trying to even
centuries-old
make
traditions,
attitudes
and we are
Безопасное
confident that together
It's not working at
we
all
will
in
secure
Russia. To a certain extent,
Нашего
it is in
safe
Belarus.
единого народа.
and proud future for Russia
Слава
as a single
доблестным
people.
вооруженным силам.
Glory
You know, the
За Россию.
sacrifice
to the armed
За
forces,
победу.
these
for
people
Russia,
went through and
for victory. Hurrah!
Who was it? Oh, it was this that Jimmy Dore I sent you. It's like this woman, I guess she was in Blackadder, British Jewish woman, and she was it's like meet all one. You know, the way these people in the West are acting. She wonders if it's more difficult than the fight back in the West. Because it's not just some of these countries, it's taking over the entire world. Jimmy Dore is also saying there's no difference between what the Zionists are like and the Nazis. It's like what we said in history. I was thinking that, but he made his show before ours, so I guess Jimmy Dore and I are connected. So, yeah. It's not that difficult conclusion to draw, you know. And he is also saying, you know, what we said in the show, like it's like, you know, but you know, like this exceptionalism, like Americans are the exceptional people. No, he was actually saying, I think, the master
Parade,
race
attention.
and God's chosen people. He said, "There's what's the difference, you know?"
Looks like snow.
Yeah, it's a mix. Probably, maybe it's even more miserable than snow, to be honest with you, because it's a wet, cold stuff hitting you. Snow is
4
nice and
battalions,
fluffy and
1 linear distance.
Первый батальон прямо. Остальные направо.
all the different types of marches they do, you know? Some where they bend the knee, some where they're like goose-stepping straight leg, and this one is a different one altogether.
Arms.
Now, look at
You know, when you hear that Russian national anthem, even for an expat like myself, it still fills you with such a sense of pride. Just the sound of the Russian national anthem, it's such a moving anthem. And of course, very strong words from the Russian President Vladimir Putin, basically saying 79 years on since the defeat of Nazism, and yet there are certain people in the world, certain players who want to whitewash the history of Nazism from the Second World War. Certain actors in the West, they don't want to recognize what was the Soviet Union's enormous sacrifice and fight during the Second World War, the Great Patriotic War, as it is known here in the Russian Federation. Upwards of 27, 28 million people were lost from the Soviet Union. That's civilian and military deaths as well. It is far above any other country, certainly of the Allied forces. The United States lost about 400,000. Great Britain, about 450,000. France lost about 600,000. But as I said, the Soviet Union, well over 20 million. And that is why this day is so pertinent to everyone in the Russian Federation. Barely a family is still left unaffected by this tragedy that happened 79 years ago today.
A lot of people,
now, Putin was mentioning some of the biggest battles for the Soviet Union. Of course, you had the siege of Leningrad. I mean, films and documentaries have been made about that true tragedy. The Battle of Kursk, the Battle of Smolensk.
You don't have a seaport.
Of course, the Battle of Berlin, when the Soviets pushed the Germans all the way back to Berlin. It was the Soviets who pushed the enemy back to its lair, and that is where the Germans capitulated. 79 years we're marking this Victory Day 2024.
Russia, and even if they do have a lot of resources.
And let's cross over to Igor Zhdanov now, our correspondent standing by on a local airfield, who's gearing up for the flyover here. Igor, it's Rory here. I hope you can hear me okay. Tell me where you are and what you're setting up for. What's it like there now?
What they have now, Russia.
Absolutely, Rory. We are on an airfield just outside Moscow. In fact, about 60 kilometers away from Moscow. And fighter jets are taking off right now as I speak. The Swift, one of the best aerobatics teams in the world, is about to take to the skies and to head to the Red Square. It has been a couple of days since these fighter jets took part in the Victory Day parade. Well, today they do, even despite truly unprecedented weather conditions. We've seen one by one groups and individual planes take off from this field. Here's yet another one about to lift off. Again, these are among the best of the world. The Russian Knights, it's another aerobatics team, is already in the skies and on your way, Rory. So be sure to expect them. And well, surely I'm at my utmost confidence that you will be able to give them the welcome they deserve, because truly the way they paint the skies above the Red Square is the rarest of sights to behold.
Can't have mud, or it's any kind of mud, or any tank, I guess, has a hard time in mud, but...
Yeah, well, thanks very much for that, Igor. The noise from you is coming over here. The jets are on their way. And what a day it is here for Victory Day 2024.
Who are these soldiers?
Let's find out more from our correspondents. RT's Shay Bowes standing by. Shay, I know you're down in the thick of it, mate. Tell me, how is it going where you are now?
Oh, this guy.
Well, Rory, it's as you say, it's a momentous occasion, an incredible occasion. And one thing that hits you, we're here in the forecourt, if you like, just in front of Basil's Cathedral, that iconic Russian landmark. And what hits you is the sound, this booming sound of thousands of men marching, this energy and this huge feeling of celebration. It's tinged with emotion, of course, as so many people have said, the vast sacrifice of the Soviet people. 60% of whom were Russian, 27 million dead, probably over 12 million soldiers killed in combat. But as you said as well, what's so important is that we continue to remember the sacrifice of the Soviet people. And 60% of those were Russian, remember. And it was the Red Army that accounted for over 75% of the Wehrmacht, this vast army, the greatest army that had ever been seen, that poured over Russia's borders to attack the Soviet Union. And they accounted for 75% of that. So the combat effectiveness of the Wehrmacht, which was probably the most modern, well-equipped army in history at the time of the invasion of the Soviet Union, was crippled and crushed. These great strategic leaders, Zhukov, surrounding the 6th Army at Stalingrad, the siege of Leningrad, the lifting of the siege, Vladimir Putin himself, President Putin's own family suffering during the siege of Leningrad, his own brother dying of diphtheria during that siege. So these links, these emotional links, these physical links to the Great Patriotic War, as it's known here in Russia, are so real here, and you can feel it in the air.
Yeah.
There's barely a family across the old Soviet Union or Russia who hasn't got a story to tell, who doesn't remember with great passion and pride this immense victory which freed Europe and the world from the terror of fascism. So as we watch these people march past us today, these veterans, these young people whose grandfathers and great-grandfathers saved us and absolutely saved us from the horrors of fascism. We have to remember that there are many in the West now with a revisionist view of the world, suggesting that the Soviet Union wasn't that central to this defeat of fascism. It's absolutely not the case. Lend-Lease, the assistance as President Putin has mentioned, that the Russians will never forget the help that was given, but it was minimum. 60,000 British civilians, for example, died in the war. Over 10 million Russian civilians probably died in the war. So the scale of the sacrifice is never forgotten here. And as the years go by, people say, why remember this great conflict? In Russia, it's believed, and it's been proven, that remembering this great conflict and this great victory becomes more and more important as the years pass, Rory.
Actually, we don't need to wear these headphones.
Yeah, Shay, well said, well said. Good points there as well. You know, you mentioned the siege of Leningrad. I mean, one of the biggest tragedies, of the Second World War. The siege of Leningrad, 872 days. The people, it's modern-day St. Petersburg, by the way, but it was Leningrad back then. 872 days was the siege. And at the time, Leningrad's entire able-bodied population was mobilized to build anti-tank fortifications in support of the city's 200,000 Red Army defenders. Now look, the German blockade and the siege of Leningrad, it claimed 650,000 Leningrader lives in 1942 alone. Let me give you some other numbers here. So out of a pre-war population in Leningrad, St. Petersburg, Leningrad, a pre-war population of 3.5 million, by the end of it, 700,000 were left. I mean, you know, you've got to talk about the huge price that was being paid right there. And not long after that, well, the Germans, the Nazis, were driven by the Soviet Union all the way back to Berlin. You've got to wonder, you know, when the Nazis were storming Europe, so much of Europe fell so quickly. Luxembourg fell in 1 day, Holland in 5 days, Yugoslavia fell in 11 days, France, a month and 12 days, it buckled, Greece, 24 days, Poland, 27 days, the Soviet Union, 1,418 days. That's 4 years the Soviet Union held out for, and that is why the Soviet Union bore the brunt of the sacrifice of the Second
the West
World
seems to
War.
not realize.
Now, of course, it's a big week here. Not just May Day today, but Tuesday was Vladimir Putin, the Russian president's inauguration. A lot of patriotism really, really in the air these days, this week, all across the Russian Federation. The day after Putin was inaugurated, he went to meet with his school teacher, Vera Gurevich, a lovely, slightly older lady now, a pensioner, but she sat down with her old student, the Russian president. She said, "Ask your questions and I will answer you." And the first thing President Putin said, "I can't believe you joined me in such weather. Thank you so much for braving the cold." And that will be one of the small takeaways from this Victory Day 2024. Although the sun is more or less shining right now, it is a bit chilly, it is a bit windy. But, you know, I can't complain with all the people on Red Square, the veterans now as well. How old are the few remaining veterans that are still with us today? If the war was 79 years ago, these gentlemen and the remaining ladies must be up in their 90s by now. And from all of us, we thank them from the bottom of our hearts for the sacrifice that they engaged in for the Second World War. Let's listen in just for a moment
can you
here as we
tell us if
continue with
that
our
Jukes is better
commemoration
now?
and celebrations of Victory Day 2024 live here
Is that better?
in Moscow.
No, it's because this is loud, that's it.
Oh.
In Russia. The Peter the Great naval
Should
corps
I
parade
keep talking and
formation is
people
marching
can
in
tell?
the Red Square.
So Rolf
Leading
saying
the
it was
formation is the corps chief,
other people, huh?
First Captain
much better. Okay, thank you.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Today, the cadets carry on the traditions of their predecessors, following the motto,
Look at
honor
that
to
guy.
service, loyalty
Incredible.
to the motherland.
He's probably late 90s or something.
Cadets from the Admiral Makarov Pacific Higher
All
Naval
those
School are joining
veterans
the
are
parade.
very old now.
Yeah.
Do you know, I can feel the vibrations from Red Square, even at my stand-up location here, 8 floors off the ground.
Oh, look at his St. George ribbon there.
I can feel the music. I can feel the marching. It's just something amazing.
How
I
many
love
American,
May
or
9th in the heart
I am
of
assuming American
Moscow.
or English
Let's get back
speaking.
now to, Don Corder, you're down there on Red Square, mate.
Well, like you said, the
really
Belarusian
getting
channels need
close
them.
to a real close
Yeah.
meet and greet
So
for you there with all the
Belarus.
crews. Tell me what's going on.
Any
How
of
is
you
it there
that are
where you
watching here, some of you
That's
stations,
right, Rory.
we
Well,
need
it's
some
snowing on and off
English-speaking
here, but
people.
like you said, the weather might be cold, but that has not stopped anyone who wanted to
Send
come
me for a
to
little
see
bit
this,
of 2-week training.
enormously,
I'll be like these
amazing
guys.
ceremony to come and see this. The weather's not going to stop anyone who has the opportunity to see
But I'm
this
so
up close
young and
because
so
it's just
pretty
so,
that,
incredible, really. We
these
haven't even
guys
gotten
would
to
be
the
out of
armored
business, those guys
portion
in
yet,
Russia.
And yet, you know, I've just got goosebumps watching the columns go by, how well they're marching, how
Yeah,
the
just like what
echoes
this
of
guy's
their
saying.
screams, as you can
It's
just
incredible,
hear,
and the
behind
Americans
me,
are.
just echoes throughout
He's not
Red
going to
Square.
say it, but
Really gives
they're
you a
not.
sense
They're not
just
capable
how,
of pulling something like this
the
off.
might and power of the Russian military, especially
Power and the
it's
discipline.
a very important time for Russian people to
dedication.
understand that the military has the capability to defend themselves against threats from all over the world, specifically from the West. I mean, something that Vladimir Putin mentioned in his speech is that the people who are fighting in the Russian
well, even I was in
right
during
now,
the times
on
of the
front
Cold War
lines
when
in,
America was at its height.
The special military
And
operation are heroes of the
I don't
Russian
think we would
Federation,
be able to
because
pull
right
something
now what
this
they're
big
doing is
off.
continuing
You know, and
the
Russia does it every
legacy
year.
of the Red Army soldiers who destroyed fascism in the Second World War. Another thing that my colleague Shea Bose mentioned is that in the West, historical revisionism has become accepted in many countries, saying that the Soviet Union either did not play a big role in the destruction of fascism in the Second
we just
World
said that
War,
too.
or even going as far as to say that Nazi Germany and
Well,
the
this
Soviet
afternoon
Union
is,
were
if you want to go,
equally as
is
deplorable
at
conquerors
Victory Square.
of
I think they're just saying, he's just saying that they were allies or something of
completely
At,
not true.
at
The
Victory
Soviet
Square,
Union,
Lukashenko's
gave
laying a
up
wreath
over
this
27
afternoon.
million of
He's
its
playing a what?
people to
Laying a wreath.
liberate Eastern
Oh,
Europe
okay.
from
This
the
afternoon.
scourge of fascism. This is something that
Victory
many people
Square
in the West
in
have forgotten,
Minsk.
unfortunately,
Yeah,
on
he's
this
coming
day.
Yeah, he
back.
did that
This is
last
something
time
that the
too. It's
Russian
like
people
in the
have
morning
most
he's in
certainly
Russia,
not
and then in the
forgotten,
afternoon
as
he
we can see every
he
year
was in
by
Belarus.
these parades. And this
Look
is
at all the
something
different
that,
uniforms.
the people who adhere to fascist ideology in Ukraine have to consider, because the military operation continues, and it's
actually a
no
crime
doubt
what the
that
West did
Russian
to Ukraine,
military
you
is
know?
going to
It's
accomplish
incredible.
the same thing it
And they've been doing it for decades.
back in 1945 over
Steering
Nazi
them over
Germany,
into
the destruction of fascist
and
ideology, where it
fanning the
rears its head.
flames
So
and
right now we're
nurturing
still
it like
seeing
a
the,
small
military,
seed or something. This fascism.
infantry portion of this parade
And
go by, but again,
I'll tell you
like I
what,
said
I'm hoping
earlier
that
in the program, we're
Russia
expecting
goes
around
in and starts
75
reversing
armored
all of this
vehicles
stuff.
and tanks to go through Red Square after
But
this infantry
I think
portion
it's just
goes
too
by.
big of a
That's
task.
definitely going
You
to
know,
be
I think they're
very
going to have to go
very
to
loud,
the
in fact, also, if you
to
think this
Kiev,
is loud, I mean, having
take Kiev,
modern and
beyond that, in the West, let the
going
Nazis
by is a very,
have their
loud
own little
experience. I
Nazism
mean,
country
I've never been this
and deal
close
with
before, so we're
the
gonna have to
European
see how
Union
that
and see how
goes,
the
but,
European Union is
it's
going to like what
definitely
they've
something
created.
I'm very lucky to see, and I'm sure the veterans here that are behind the camera
And
right
maybe
now
they
in
can
the
develop
bleachers, as well as the
eastern part of
veterans
Ukraine
and,
to become more like Russia and
participants of
Belarus.
the special military operation in Ukraine,
Where
which
they
are here in attendance right now.
are
They're
not
definitely
a
looking forward
parasite.
to seeing that as well. It's a great occasion.
Most of Ukraine,
for everyone
unfortunately,
here,
for a long
as well
time,
as
has been a
the, foreign
parasite
dignitaries that have been invited
on the
to
Soviet
witness
Union and
this
Russia.
as well. Like I said, last time I went live with you, Rory, we're looking at the presidents of Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Belarus, a lot of other, Kazakhstan as well, among many others, as well as foreign delegations from countries outside the Eurasian and former Soviet sphere. We're looking at a delegation from Laos, which is, as of late, become very, very close with Russia in terms,
Those look like
of economic
special
and political
forces.
cooperation.
I don't know if they
as
are,
well
but
as Cuba, the Cuban
I
president
don't know why I'm
himself
saying that, but
is
it
here
just, I get that
attending
feeling.
this year's Red Square military parade in honor of 79 years of victory over fascism. He and his delegation are here, of course, enjoying this just breathtaking parade that's going on behind me. So really, this is an occasion that anyone who receives an invitation, anyone
So next
who
year will
has
be
the opportunity
80th,
to see
so
these
that might be a
military
little bit
parades
bigger even, huh?
and honor
Yeah,
By
and,
that time,
and the Ukraine will be over by then. So.
Yeah, it should be over by then. I don't know. I tell you what.
You can go there with your residency card without a visa
is going to take
to
it,
Russia.
no doubt. This is something
yeah,
that, I mean,
you
I
said that.
myself, for years before
Belarusian
I even,
residency
lived in
card, so
Russia,
that's
wanted
part
to
of the
see
Union
it.
state.
It was a childhood dream of mine, and
Yeah, they changed it this
it's
January.
really great that now I get to every year
You know, I
cover
tell you,
this
I
on
wouldn't
Red
be
Square. Every year
myself.
it's just as breathtaking as the last. To see
I wouldn't
just
be
how,
disappointed if they
how amazing
made it
the,
more
infantry,
more of a
columns are
Union
here
state,
on Red
practically
Square.
like that
It looks
Belarus
like
would be a
the
part of
last
Russia,
them
because
have
they need a little
actually
bit more of that
just gone through,
patriotism here,
and
as the Russians have.
we're probably going to see very
Like
soon,
I said, it's
either the air show
the
or
West
the
has
armored columns come in onto Red
done a
Square.
lot of
I can
brainwashing
actually
in
see from the
Belarus.
corner of my eye the lead tank from
I think
the
during that time,
Great
Lukashenko
Patriotic
trying to,
War that traditionally leads the armored columns with
what is the word?
flag of
The,
victory on top of it,
accept
as well
the West
as
and the East and
Russian flag
being more,
usually
what is
on
it,
as
open.
well, marking
And
the beginning of
the West has
armored
turned it
portion.
against
So
Belarus and
really, just an
brainwashed
amazing
a lot of the
show
youth.
of strength of the Russian military here.
So it's social media.
Yeah.
The music also is something that's
Social
really
media, through social
great.
media.
I've always really loved Soviet songs, Soviet military songs from the Great Patriotic War period, and this is something that the musical ensemble on Red Square is always playing. It's always a pleasure to hear it, and especially live. Of course, there's nothing beats live music here on Red Square, along with the military march. Speaking of the musicians, they're now leaving Red Square because it looks like the armored portion is about to begin. I can see them coming onto Red Square right now, led by, looks like, T-34 tank from the Great Patriotic War. And we've got military armored vehicles coming in behind them as well. You can see the St. George's ribbon on the tank, and the emblem of the Guards of the Red Army as well, with the hammer and sickle, the emblem of the Soviet Union, which of course was victorious over the Nazi Germany and the Axis powers during the Second World War. And you know, we have to understand also, you know, the Soviet Union comprised not only of Russia, but of many other Soviet republics as well. And they, as Vladimir Putin said earlier in his speech, all of the former Soviet republics, then obviously Soviet republics, fought one-on-one with fascism in Europe to free the world from that horrible ideology. And so there are representatives, of course, from all of these countries, and people from all these countries come to Moscow on Victory Day as well to you know, enjoying the ceremony, because even when these tanks and troops roll off of Red Square, although Red Square is closed for special guests and foreign dignitaries to see on Red Square, this parade is going to actually go on to streets that are going to be available to the general population. So for those who don't receive an invitation onto Red Square, this parade is actually visible for them on different parts of Moscow, usually on one of these main
reporters are
streets
actually
that goes
good,
to
aren't they?
Moscow,
I don't know how they can continue to talk for such a long time, thinking up things to say.
Off of Red Square. You can see behind me also these armored vehicles that I mentioned before, behind the lead tank of the armored portion.
No.
We've got more of them coming over here on the right. You should be able to see behind me very soon. And troops upon them as well, with the St. George's ribbon, which of course is a symbol of Victory Day over fascism. Unfortunately, a symbol that's been banned in places that, of course,
what you were suspecting is actually will work, huh? Without
revisionism that I mentioned earlier in my talk here, like Ukraine, people, you know, wearing this symbol have been repressed in Ukraine just for wearing a symbol of victory over fascism. But now it looks like we've got another portion
yeah,
of
it's
the
incredible.
armored
What you know, the stuff that they're coming up with. They, you know.
Should be able to see behind me.
Okay, Don.
like that the Jimmy Dore show was talking about.
In come the boys with their big
You
toys
cannot
right now with
criticize Israel. They had Glenn Greenwald on his show as well. I mean, not that he was on the show, but they had a clip with Glenn Greenwald talking and saying you can criticize everything about America or any place, anywhere, but you cannot criticize Israel, anything about Israel. Now it's a law.
One of our colleagues is also an absolute military expert and historian as well, Shay Bowes.
And just like they're doing this stuff trying to eliminate the fact that Russia played probably the biggest part in getting rid of fascism in World War II. You know, they're trying to disappear that fact.
Lighter reconnaissance vehicles. Some of them were the Tiger, which are a lighter reconnaissance vehicle. But as you can see, coming behind us now are the Yars ballistic missile carriers, which are part of Russia's nuclear fleet, actually, as well. And they're escorted by a BRDM armoured vehicle, as you can see behind me. Now, these rolled into Moscow about a month ago, to great dismay from some people in the West, suggesting that this was some sort of strategic movement by Moscow. The noise from the engines is absolutely insane. And these are mobile missile launchers. Very difficult to track and part of Russia's very modern nuclear deterrent.
Wow, look at all the
And remember, Russia probably has the
wheels
biggest
to carry the weight.
arsenal of nuclear weapons on Earth, and it probably has the most modern one, including the Sarmat missile, a recent development, which can be deployed from this vast underwater naval fleet as well. And the noise behind me is absolutely deafening. These are S-400 anti-aircraft systems.
I think the U.S. is playing catch-up now, you know, because they thought they could defeat Russia
one of the best, if not the best,
in many ways besides militarily.
Defense system on Earth.
And Russia
Unrivaled, really. We hear
saw
a lot
this
about
coming,
Patriots
and now the U.S. is playing catch-up militarily.
The S-400 and now the S-500, which is in development, the Triumph system, is without
And they
doubt
are
one of
already
the best, if not the best, anti-aircraft
trying to
system on Earth, and it provides
own
a
the
huge amount of cover to
airwaves
troops in the SMO.
Propaganda and media. The West.
All right. Okay, great. Shay, thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Well, the commemorations and the celebrations do continue here. I'm Rory Souchet with our continuous special coverage for Victory Day 2024, RT International, live and loud across Red Square and the other iconic landmarks of the capital.
Давайте знакомиться. Руслан, 40 лет. Острит не по-детски.
Баклажан мне в бок.
Покупки по...
Different channel. Oh. Send a look. Do you know how to pronounce that supermarket? Really weird.
No.
Starts with a C. It's Santa, just like Santa Claus.
I know.
The H is an N. The C is an S. And the M, and that is a T.
They paid a huge tribute.
Real confusing.
The vote against the Germans and the Nazis.
Your native language is English.
The vote against the Germans and the Nazis for since 1941 to the end of the war, they paid a tribute of 27 million.
What's that noise, Cyril?
That's the aircraft that are flying just over us. We have the red Russian flag that is coming right on top of us.
Well, this is when the good stuff comes, really. I mean, you and me love this. When the big helicopters come over, the fast, fighter jets come over, you see the big illusions as well, the big transport craft. And when they come over us, you can't even hear yourself think. But their technology is awesome. Some of these Tupolovs, the Swan, retrofitted, upgraded now. God, can you hear that noise? Oh, amazing. Cyril, I wanted to ask you, because as the aviation's flying all over the place, you have a famous French relative from World War II. Let me check my phone here, if I'm not mistaken here. The General Jean de Lattre de Tassigny, your relative, yes?
That's my great-great-uncle on the second branch of the family, yes.
And so what was the story with that?
Well, when the German resignated, Charles de Gaulle could not attend the ceremony because he was still blacklisted by the Vichy regime. And it's the General de Lattre who signed the resignation of the Germans for de Gaulle.
I see.
And he was the general of the French First Army, who landed in France in Provence on the 15th of August 1944.
I see.
A couple of weeks after the Allies in Normandy. And what I wanted to say is, because you asked me the question before, the implication of the USSR has allowed during the East Front to crush the German armies, and because they crushed the German armies, the Allies were able to get into Europe and to open the West Front. Right. Without the East Front, that would not have been possible.
That's right.
And the big problem is, to me, this fact is undertold in the West. I remember when I was in school, just in school, studying Second World War, I was always taught that, the Anglo-Americans and Canadians, they came and liberated us.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah,
It's
like you
not
just
a
said.
point to minimize what they did. Of course, we should not minimize what they did. But without the East Front, that would not have been possible.
But are historians minimizing what the Soviets
I think one of the times that I was woken up was when Paul Craig Roberts, Dr. Professor Paul Craig Roberts, the father of Reaganomics, you know, he was saying that it was actually the Soviets that liberated Europe from the fascists. And I was even a history major, and I didn't really even know this, because they don't teach you that stuff. They don't want you to know that in the West. America did it all. Just like America defeated ISIS. Not Russia.
That's exactly the case. Kennedy understood this.
Yes.
Kennedy understood
Hey, there
this.
he is.
And we all know how he ended.
Yeah.
Eisenhower understood this.
Yeah,
Don't let the military-industrial complex get
He
into
warned us a long time ago.
And after the Second World War, for the West, it was useful to minimize the impact of USSR because of the Cold War, as the Nazi system was used by the West because the Nazis, the neo-Nazi
He's saying it that way probably
ideology
not to get
has
deleted.
been used by the United States and the Western country to fight communism. If you look, for example, at the Second World War, the combat in Ukraine against neo-Nazi did not end in 1944. It lasted for a couple of years after. So
couple of
this
years?
is
At least
very
a decade.
useful and very common as a doxa and
As a matter of fact,
narrative
you could
from
even
the West to
show the
reduce
continuity
the
up until
impact
this
of
very
the
day.
USSR during the Second World War, and also Winston Churchill.
Probably in the
understood
60s it was
this
at the
very
lowest,
well in
lowest
1941,
point, right?
When
And at
he
some
gave
point in time, the
plans
U.S. started
to,
reviving it and nurturing
to
that
the
like a
Russians
seed.
to design aircraft,
Again.
to take the Sturmovik, for example, or the DC-3 in the U.S. You have the same here. It's because Churchill gave them, and you had negotiations between Stalin, Churchill, with Karelia and with Greece, for example.
Churchill flew to
All
Moscow a
this is
few times to
completely
see Stalin,
undertold. It served only one purpose, is
and
to
stayed up all night drinking with
rewrite
him.
the history. If you look,
I didn't even know this.
This morning,
Yeah,
what
he
said
flew,
the
he flew to Moscow a few times.
I know certain facts about World War II, but there's so
spokesperson
much I don't
from,
know. You know a lot more
the
than I
White
do.
House, Karine
You didn't.
Jean-Pierre.
You're not a history major.
All right, so I'm not.
Say what you will about her.
I'm not American.
There's nothing
Yeah,
to say.
yeah.
It's better not
So
say
did they
anything.
brainwash you guys as much as they
Once
brainwashed
we
us
have
about
reached
World War II?
such
Not when I went to school.
when
Really?
we have
Yeah,
reached
maybe-
such
maybe
a
now
level
they do.
of willing to rewrite
yeah.
the history, we
Interesting.
understand in which world we'll
Yeah, I
live.
went to school before it all started changing.
Yeah, and it's hard to shrug off that brainwashing, you know, even if I'm told the truth, it kind of doesn't stick because, you know, you're told something over and over and over again for decade after decade. It's very difficult to get rid of that, an indoctrination.
I mean, we were taught about how bad Stalin was, but since being here and reading all these new books, you know, the ones I've showed you,
You pretty much shrugged that off, huh?
yeah, I've just found out that's all bullshit as well.
I'm finding it hard to shrug off, but, you know.
Well, your wife says the same thing to you about Stalin.
Yeah, but like I said, it's difficult to shrug off, you know, because we've been told all this time, he's an evil guy and he massacred millions of his own people and things like that.
As he said, for the inevitable.
But then you come here even and you see like these buildings and a lot of the things that, I mean, that say, so, well, is this guy such a bad guy when he did so many good things, at least the infrastructure things.
Yeah,
you
well,
know?
Khrushchev was the problem. He's the one that lied about Stalin and helped and he started all that off.
Yeah, incredible.
I had a book called that, Khrushchev lied, but
yeah, and they took
She admitted to this.
No, wait.
It's not a secret anymore. It should have been kept a secret if the predictions of the NATO.
Well, I heard from other people too that a lot of these crappy buildings and stuff, you know, because Khrushchev he wanted to outdo Stalin, and he, you know, faster and build more, and
military success in Ukraine. It's a total failure for everything.
You know, big sacrifice of quality. There was still some quality things built during Khrushchev time, but for the most part, that's when the bad quality kind of started.
Absolutely everything is a failure, and now they have a big problem because
he hated Stalin and all that. That's why.
Yeah,
rumor is it that he's the one that poisoned Stalin.
Interesting thoughts, you know, like
some people thought it was Beria, but not a lot of people think it was Khrushchev.
In a couple of months.
But it's sort of like, you know, you see the difference between Stalin
because Khrushchev got rid of Beria as well.
What's that?
Khrushchev got rid of Beria as well, you know.
2014, they start sanctioning Russia for any kind of.
I remember Putin talking about Khrushchev when he was in the United Nations. He would take his shoe off and start pounding on the podium or something like that to make his point.
And what was the inevitable? The conflict that the West has been preparing for since 2014. I mean, look, you talk about Nazism in World War II. Putin talks about it. In Ukraine, you've got the Banderites, you've got the neo-Nazi Azov battalions.
Right sector.
You've got a number of them there.
There's
the Western
Lukashenko.
press, politicians
he's normally
never
with
mention it. They never want to show any of the swastika kind of symbols they have on some of the tanks.
Yeah.
They did. In 2014, during the Maidan, there is a reportage that has been made by Paul Morera, who is from Canal Plus Investigations. It's a French media. And he emphasized at this time on the implication of the Nazis and the neo-Nazis in Ukraine. But after, it was completely told. But which is interesting when you speak yourself about Ukraine,
that must be
and when
the new
we
leader of
speak
Cuba
about Victory
next to
Day,
him.
is that the West never understood one very important thing.
Tell me.
Is that
The woman has to keep bending down because she's so
feeling
tall.
that she is attacked. And if the country is attacked, then the whole country will be behind the president. This is Russian soul.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
this is the way it works, and the West never understood this. Now they have started something that they don't know how to stop.
Yeah.
The easiest way for them to stop this would be to say, okay,
what they're saying.
we screwed up, sorry.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
They've started something they don't know how to stop.
It will not be wiped out like
well,
this.
they thought they could roll right over Russia and get them to capitulate and take the resources and knuckle them under and be subservient. And it didn't happen.
Now, Russians, we are all behind the president.
Oh, the support, I mean, come on, Cyril, the support for Putin these days, it's
yeah, the West didn't expect
I mean, look, he's just been inaugurated.
That what happened is what's happened now with the power of Russia
pride in this country
surging.
Is just, you can feel
it. Actually,
you know, there really is, because
obviously
at the end of the
backfired.
day, and I said this during our special
I
coverage
don't
of the presidential election, if you have
Lukashenko.
been living in Russia for the
Maybe
past
he's on the
15
way back
years or
here.
so, you have been on the beating end, the receiving end of Russophobic rhetoric from the West, sanctions and all sorts of punishment. And so many of these sanctions are based on, as I said, cockamamie shenanigans. The West just cooks up almost like a Hollywood recipe. They create something, then they have the media blast it, they blame Putin or whoever, and they sanction. Now, when you look back at it, you realize they were sanctioning Russia to soften it up for the inevitable that came into Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine is the tragic staging ground for this proxy war between America, NATO, and the Russian Federation, and yet, where does it stand now? All the front lines, owned and operated by the West, are collapsing.
For my
the Russian
lifetime,
Federation can continue moving westwards.
At least since 2001, when I started paying a lot more attention to politics, it's to me it's always been obvious that the West hates Russia and is trying to undermine it.
The main purpose
and
of
Russia's acting like that wasn't the case. Now, of course, they come right out and admit it that they know that.
People from Donbass
and to make sure that does not happen again. And that could have been prevented.
Yeah.
That could have been prevented by the West by applying the Minsk agreements that were signed.
But they knew they were not going to apply them. Of course. They knew it was just a way.
Yeah,
they
I think
admitted it down the
Putin
road.
blames
They
himself that he
admitted
didn't
it,
start a military operation sooner.
Sarkozy may have made mention.
Hollande and Merkel.
Merkel and the former
he also
Ukrainian
says he shouldn't have
Poroshenko as well.
trusted the West.
They all admitted that the Minsk Accords were just to be used to give Ukraine and the West
Time to build up
to
military.
militarize, weaponize, train up, and get ready. And the whole time Putin, and by the way, Putin even said, I was naive. I should not have
I just said
trusted
that. They
them
must have
for so
listened.
long. Putin even admitted he was naive.
But you know that Putin on one side is
Not that I wasn't
considered
thinking
to
he was
be,
naive.
Too nice.
Yeah.
A lot of
He
people
was hoping,
say that,
I think.
Come on. Go. But he is very clever, and he plays the right way. He's not closing the door. He's not closing the door to any kind of negotiation. And as a matter of fact, he always proposes solutions.
If we hear Dmitry Medvedev talking now, I wonder what would have been happening if he was the president.
To reconquer Crimea, which is Russian, by force.
That was a master
A lot of
stroke,
people
how he
they
did
are
that with
ignoring
Crimea.
this. The West is not even talking about
No,
it.
of course.
And from March 2021
No,
to the
military
end of
action or nothing.
2021,
Crimea.
President
Yeah,
Putin came with
Crimea
full
wanted to
plans
be a
of
part of Russia, and they always
negotiations.
have been.
All
Yeah,
four
but it wasn't
plans of
the Russians. It
negotiations
was,
have been
they had
denied
20,000
by NATO.
Ukrainian soldiers
The
there,
problem
right?
is coming also
And
from
they
NATO.
just took off their
NATO
patches
has no use
and
anymore.
just changed
Maybe
sides.
it had a use.
That's why
during
all
the
those
Cold
little
War,
green
but
men
the
are
Cold
actually
War
Ukrainian
ended.
ex-soldiers.
Everything,
Yeah, that's why
everything
they didn't have
ended.
any
And
singer.
when
They
the
took their
communism
They didn't have
collapsed,
their
Russians
loyalty to
themselves,
Kiev,
they
in other
came
words.
several
Yeah,
times.
They just took their patches off and
in
then that's it.
negotiation with Clinton, for example, saying,
Sure, they were encouraged.
okay, you are part of your community.
To a large extent.
We became democratic. We're part of your community. We are interested in getting into NATO.
And everybody thought it was the Russians, but it wasn't.
That's a good idea, said Clinton, didn't they?
Changed
And
sides.
after the Falcons from Washington, they said,
No,
because this is going against our plans. And
Putin legitimately asked
I wonder if
That other
those
book I bought.
Ukrainians were actually from the Crimea, right?
That other
question,
book
by
I
the way,
bought got
right
that
now,
in there as
the
well.
Russian president with
They
a
what?
That other
number
book I
of
bought
people
has
that
also
are
got
visiting
that
the
in there.
tomb of the unknown soldier. I know
Well, these
you were there a
people,
couple of
these
days ago
Ukrainians
here
were probably
in the
from the
heart
Crimea.
of
Yeah,
Moscow.
Yeah, and they were raised there, and they
It's a difficult time for the Russian
had
Federation when
more
you think about
compassion
soft
towards Russia
power,
than they did.
hard
Yeah,
power,
the guy said about 90%
propaganda,
of the 20,000
the
just
narratives
changed sides.
that are propagated by certain Western
Yeah.
actors.
Huh.
It's Putin often finds himself on the receiving end of rhetoric where they take truths and they twist them. And they just throw them.
Twist the truth.
And there seems to be a real lack of
Surprise, look.
respect today
Oh, there it is.
when it
That him?
comes to
Huh?
the
No.
general diplomacy and etiquette between political and world leaders. Putin has been saying to his professional partners in the West for years, stop coming to our borders with NATO.
Is that him on the
Stop
right?
doing
I
this.
think so.
Please listen to us. Please listen
Second
to
from
us.
the end, huh?
No. No, they just don't want to listen to what Putin or Russia has to say.
the West doesn't understand that Putin is not a poker
Yeah.
player.
Yeah.
Putin, when he says, I will do this, he will do it.
Yeah.
And you spoke about NATO bringing its border towards Russia. Well, that was part of the discussion between Gorbachev.
Yes.
When they said, okay, we would like to reunify
A lot of
East
people
and
think
West
in
Germany.
Russia that Gorbachev's a traitor
if you
too.
agree, then we agree
Yeah, I
now
know.
to extend
I know,
our
I hear that.
border towards
My
the
wife
old
is also
blocks,
that.
East Bloc nations.
Yeah.
Look
think
what
my
happened.
wife
Look at
says
the
the same
border.
thing.
Look at the border, how
Yeah,
they
a
were
lot of people.
before and where they are today. It's exactly the same thing. And Ukraine has always been a casus belli because
Well,
if
you
you
know, you
talk
can
about
also say Yeltsin was,
nuclear defense
but
system,
I think these
if
people were just too
Ukraine
naive.
joins NATO,
I don't think Putin
then
was
the
naive.
Americans will
I
do
think
in
he was
Ukraine
hopeful.
exactly what they did
Even
in
if he says he
Romania,
was
what they
naive,
did
I
in
think he was
Poland, what
actually
they did in
hopeful that
different
the
countries.
West
They
would honor the
bring
Minsk
nuclear
agreements.
defense missile into the eastern part of Ukraine, which would put missiles at less than
Lukashenko's
6
tall.
minutes of flight from
Yeah,
Moscow.
I
And
was
then, in
thinking
this
he was
case,
that tall.
you cannot make the difference between a preemptive strike and a preventive strike.
That's right.
Now, if you add to this the will of the United States, I'm going to be very rude, but the United States, they don't give shit about that problem because they will never
Don't give a
put
shit
at
about what
stake
problem?
one of the city like New York, Los Angeles, whatever, to save a city in Europe like Prague, like Bucharest, like Paris. It's 7,000 kilometers away from them. It's not their problem.
Let me ask you this, Cyril.
Yeah, they actually don't care. They don't care about anything but themselves. And they don't care about the United States even. They care about their bank accounts, their friends, their power, you know, and their privilege.
Putting their bases along America's northern and America's southern borders. And they started
if Americans died, they say, oh gosh, it's
borders.
tragic, oh, blah, 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 and everything, but they wouldn't really care. Now watch this shot, you know, when they're playing
golf. They were doing
golf.
this on America's borders. If it was a Russia and Chinese NATO and their military bases around America, how
I was listening to Colonel McGregor. He still thinks that
to respond?
2 minutes.
that NATO's going to collapse
Remember
after all this.
the Cuban Missile Crisis?
Yes.
It's exactly this.
Yeah.
30 minutes away from the United States, and look what happened.
Yeah, yeah. And
I don't think so. I don't know. It might morph into something else.
Years, Putin was saying to the West, guys,
European army.
Collapse.
you got to stop this. You got to honor
Or
the
maybe
Minsk
it's already
Accords, you gotta
collapsed.
stop
I mean,
doing
in a
what
way,
you're doing. There's gonna
it's like
be a conflict,
just a
and the
bunch of
West
people
wouldn't
meeting
listen,
and talking
because you
how
know
they
what?
want
They were
to.
planning it
Oh yeah,
for
the
2014.
fake president
If you
was
look at
talking
the
to him yesterday.
Brzezinski
Talking to
doctrine,
who?
right?
And she was at NATO headquarters.
Brzezinski doctrine
Oh.
basically says
Really?
that
Timoshenko?
they have two
Yeah, she's a
problems. They have
traitor, right,
China
to this country.
and
Or
they have
Tikhanovskaya,
Russia.
I mean.
Yeah, she's a traitor
They
to
cannot
this
go in
country.
China first. They need to go in Russia first. And this is exactly what they did.
Yeah.
And if you look at what's happening in the Middle East and what's happening in Taiwan, and everything is all linked up together.
It is, it is. You're talking about the global chessboard book, aren't you, Brzezinski? But, I mean, the thing is also, though, when you are the hegemon and you are the most powerful bully on the block, no one wants to fight you. So you need to create
And nobody
the
will
problems,
challenge you.
and then you create the solutions. You see, and
Create
this is
the
why
problems
the
and
hegemon
then
is
create the
losing its
solution.
grip. This is why
Come up with
Putin,
the solution.
Putin, during his speech, talked about new alliances. That's why you've got the representatives here, the Cuban president, leaders from Latin America, the Caribbean, and old alliances.
Yeah,
old
it's actually a
allies,
lot of
old friends, because the world
risk.
is changing.
And I
So
don't know
here,
if you could
when
say that
President
brave. You know, a
Xi
lot of these
got his
African
re-election,
countries,
he came straight to Moscow.
you know, sure, they
and
have
he
little
said to Putin,
militaries and
heard
things,
the
but the
words,
U.S. would
"We're seeing
crush
the
them.
biggest changes in
And
100 years, and we
you know, for them
are
to
driving
actually
those changes." Joseph
ally
Borrell,
themselves
the
with
EU
Russia
spokesman,
is-
said a couple of days ago, the hegemonic universe is finished. The unicentric world is over. Boris Johnson, the
Maybe
other
you call it
day,
courageous.
even said it's over. The hegemon status, it's over.
Johnson
Why?
said that.
How has it got to this?
It's, well, you also have to add that what the West wanted to prevent, and they acquired
I think somehow
exactly
Macron
the
knows that
opposite,
too.
is to
Yeah,
put
that's why he was
pressure
trying to
on
weasel
China.
into BRICS.
He said
And
something
this is
yesterday
exactly
because
what's
of-
happening. And you have
Z was talking
two
to him, so he's
multipolar,
changed
I
his
mean,
mind
you
a
have
bit.
a unipolar world and you have the multipolar world.
Yeah, I think these people
And
are
what
just
brings,
like these
the
rats are just
BRICS,
trying to
for
figure out a way to
example,
jump off
in
the
which
ship
you
or
have
something,
Saudi
to
Arabia,
do
you
it
have
with
Iran, you have
without
China,
appearing to be
Brazil.
rats
It's
jumping
more
off a
than
ship.
50% of the human population on the, on
Boris
the,
Johnson
on
or
this planet.
Macron or
And
a lot of them.
this
Maybe even
economical
Stoltenberg, even if he's
alliance
sitting there talking
is just a huge
crap.
threat for the American
And then
economy.
they come out and say, Russia
with
is,
the depth of the
is
Americans,
struggling
with the depth
and
of the
their
European
economy is
Union,
failing.
with
It's
the
like,
depth of
what?
France.
You know?
3,000 billion euros.
Yeah.
In a way, you can recognize that the West, unfortunately, and especially the Americans, they are much more clever than the Europeans, because what they are trying to do is
Seems
to
like
save their economy. The Americans are quite good by defending their vital needs and the vital interest.
look at
I would say,
sucked
which in
a lot of
Europe
the
and in
German
France
business over
particularly
to the
were
America, to the
completely
United
stupid. We
States.
don't know how to do this, but well,
Germany
that's
just
the
sits
way
there
it
and lets
is.
their
But one of
economy
the
fail.
second goal, and I would even put this on the first war objective in the.
I would say the people
in
that are
this
helping
proxy
America the
war,
most are not even
against
American.
Russia and
Baerbock and
Ukraine
Schultz.
is to bring
They're more
down
loyal
the
to
European
America than they are
economy.
to Germany.
Because in the United States, they don't need a strong European Union.
No,
they
they
need
don't.
a weak
Well,
European
I mean,
Union.
hey, Cyril, who blew up Nord Stream? Oh, I can't even imagine. Cyril
It's not us.
Yeah, I think the U.S. wants to keep everybody
so
down.
Good having you here today for Victory Day.
Thinking
2019.
keeping everybody
Cyril
down makes
Delacour,
them
a military historian,
keeps them on the
geopolitical
top.
analyst.
Yep.
Thank you for joining us here in the heart of the Russian capital for what has been a great V-Day. A bit chilly, nonetheless, but you're warm enough, I'm warm enough, and we've seen all of those in attendance here with the veterans and all of those paying their respects and tributes. V-Day, 79 years ago, marking the defeat of Nazism and fascism. Cyril, thank you very much for joining us.
It's my great pleasure and my great honor to be here today with you guys.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, these people, these veterans that are there that participated 79 years ago. Can you imagine? They might have been 20 years old then, so that puts them at about age 99. These people are all in their late 90s.
Right. Thanks, Rory, and thanks to my colleagues Igor Zhdanov, Don Korter, and Shea Bose as well for their fantastic coverage. Well, as you just saw, the main Victory Day event, the Red Square Parade, has wrapped up on an unusually cold and snowy day here in Moscow. But we saw some 9,000 individuals and 75 military vehicles and weapons systems taking part. We heard from the Russian President, Vladimir Putin, who just 2 days ago took the oath of office.
All these
for the
English-speaking reporters. Belarus, you need to
another 6 years,
contact Duke.
Russia
You need to start doing something, and I'm ready here.
Wants to forget the lessons of
World War II.
You'll have to get your haircut.
Russia will remember them, and then we saw a moment of silence to honor the
Maybe
memory of those
technically
who
I would. You're
and
right.
died during World War II. Do stay with us. Make sure to follow our special coverage.
Okay, thanks everybody for joining us. That's the end of it. And come and watch our live show on Sunday.
Yes,
we'll be back. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. To commemorate their ancestors' deeds during the Great Patriotic War. They proudly
there you go. Anyway, come and watch the show on Sunday, and thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. In dozens of countries worldwide.